Okay, I see people are still signing in, but I'll go ahead and get us started. My name is Sandra Landis. I represent the Montgomery County Council of Parent-Teacher Associations, also known as MCCPTA. I serve as their Belltime Subcommittee Chair within the Health and Wellness Committee. MCCPTA is proud to host this event tonight, bringing in a distinguished panel to address sleep, health, and student success. The MCC PTA works together with PTA and PTSA, which is Parent Teacher Student Association leadership, and advocates for the education and welfare of children, families, and schools in Montgomery County, Maryland, based on annual advocacy priorities approved by our membership. Our motto is Every Child, One Voice, where everyone belongs. I also simultaneously serve as the Montgomery County chapter leader of Start School Later. Start School Later is an organization dedicated to ensuring school start times compatible with health, safety, education, and equity. Our chapter is proud to co-sponsor this event along with MCCPTA and Montgomery Goes Purple. Montgomery Goes Purple is a coalition of government, school, nonprofit, faith, and community organizations with a shared mission to prevent mental health and substance use related injury and death through education, stigma reduction, and ensuring equitable access to treatment and recovery resources. I'm not sure how many of you are aware that every year March is declared National Sleep Awareness Month by the National Sleep Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to advancing sleep health. In celebration of this, we not only invited the community here tonight, but we also invite students to go to school tomorrow in their pajamas. Dr. Taylor, our Montgomery County Public School Superintendent, and the principals and school leadership are aware of this follow-on activity to tonight's event for any students who wish to participate. We are pleased to be able to bring this program to you during National Sleep Awareness Month, when hopefully we can still recall the impacts of recently changing our clocks by an hour just a few weeks ago. Before we get into the substance of our event tonight, I'd like to share that we have some noteworthy registrants among us. We have Hannah Wilcove registered to attend on behalf of Council Member Evan Glass. We have Board of Education member Laura Stewart, President of the MCC PTA Bridget Howe, MCC PTA Vice President for Advocacy Rodney Peel, who was instrumental in getting our recent MCC PTA resolution on healthy sleep for adolescents enacted. In addition, we have with us Start School Later's National Operations Director and co-founder, Maribel Ibrahim, and Start School Later's National Communications Director, Eleanor Boki. If I've missed any elected officials in attendance, please write your name in the chat. We'll acknowledge your participation. We really appreciate all the attendees taking time out of your busy schedules to join us in this community conversation with our panel to discuss how schools can improve student academic success, physical and mental health, and safety with healthier sleep. At this time, I'd like to introduce all of you to Laura Mitchell. She's the MCC PTA Vice President for Administration and also one of the Montgomery Goes Purple co-founders. Laura will serve as moderator for tonight's discussion and will also share how students can claim their Student Services Learning Activity Verification for attending tonight's meeting. So with that, I'd like to introduce Laura Mitchell.
Thank you, Sandy. I appreciate that. For students who are here to learn and to earn SSL hours, don't log in and walk away, because this is going to be interactive. We'll need your participation as we go through this. I'll be dropping things in the chat that you'll need to respond to throughout, and then we will give you the link for the SSL hours near the end. Okay, so stay tuned and listen to our wonderful experts that we have here with us tonight. And we are very, very thankful to have them, very fortunate. We have Amy Wolfson, my apologies, Amy Wolfson. She is a professor of psychology at Loyola University of Maryland. Brian Robertson, he is an MD. He's a board certified in allergy, immunology, sleep medicine, and pediatrics, and is the president-elect for Maryland Sleep Society, one of the organizations that has signed on to Start Schools Later's resolution. We have Dr. Joanna Fong Isario Wong, who is a neurologist with the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. We have Lisa Van Buskirk. Sorry, I'm not sure if I hope I said that well. Chapter leader for the Maryland statewide and Anne Arundel County Start School Later. And we have Virginia Runco. She is a licensed psychologist and diplomat in behavioral sleep medicine, DC psychology, and sleep services. We are, as you can see, very, very fortunate to have all of these wonderful experts here to talk with us tonight and share their knowledge, what they've learned in many cases, decades of experience and research. And we really look forward to learning from them and hearing about all of the impacts of sleep. I know I don't function at 100% when I don't sleep, but I was pretty surprised when I went through some of the information. And I think you will be too. And I hope that you gain a lot from this as we talk about doing what some other counties have done in Maryland. Some states have done it. And moving start schools later in secondary schools. So that's middle school and middle school and high school. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Amy Wolfson. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A and we will answer them. If we don't get to them all tonight, we will get answers to them and circulate those with the videos and the slides. So you don't need to be distracted with screenshotting the slides and all of that. We will share the slides and we'll share the recording and the questions. So Amy, it's all you. Thank you.
Okay, I will share my screen. Thank you very much, Laura, and thank you, Sandy. Okay, I'll just ask Laura, can everyone see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Great.
We're good to go. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that both of those lovely introductions. I'm thrilled to be here tonight. I will say that I live in the Baltimore area, and I will admit that although I don't like to drive, I was kind of excited to be there in person with all of you, just because you get a little more jazzed by being in person, and that's part of my personality. But I will do well by Zoom as well. So it's great to be here this evening. Shout out to a few of my undergraduates from Loyola who have also joined us this evening and are passionate about the issues that I'm going to talk with you all about. So I want to say I don't have any disclosures, although I realize I should say that I am a member of the board of directors of Start School Later. And I love to start with a Zitz cartoon. I'll have a few of them in my remarks this evening. I am quite convinced that the authors of the Zitz cartoon, Jerry Scott and Jim Borgman, if you're not familiar with the cartoon, have been watching over the last 25, 30 years the incredible research done on adolescent sleep that I'm going to talk to you about, because they get it. They absolutely support delaying school start times for adolescents. And I also want to start with a quote that I got from my colleague, Dr. Mary Carskadden, who much of her work will be represented here. She quotes from this parent, "My 13-year-old son's sleep is a phase-shifted nightmare. That too seemed to happen overnight. I spent his early childhood wishing I could sleep past 5:30 in the morning on a Saturday, and now I spend most of my Saturday trying to get him out of bed by dinner." This is probably familiar to many of the parents in the room. There also are a number of sleep myths that have in fact been documented through research that exists in our large community in the United States and beyond. And I'm not going to, in the interest of time, I'm not going to sort of dialogue about them as I sometimes do, but I do want to read them to you. These are all myths. Adolescents would go to bed earlier if parents just made them. 2, some teens might need 9 hours of sleep, but my child only needs 6 hours, and so do I. 3, if school starts later, adolescents will just stay up later. 4, adolescents can make up lost sleep by sleeping in on weekends and going to school later, just 1 day a week. And 5, adolescents need to learn to just get up early. That's real life. And 6, they'll survive. Hopefully, by the end of my remarks, if you don't realize already, these are clearly myths. So in the real world, and we've known this now for decades, adolescents report less sleep than their younger siblings and friends. They report different school versus weekend night schedules that we sometimes refer to as social jet lag. They report markedly delayed bed and rise times, especially on weekends relative to their younger siblings. They report school rise times based on their school start times and commute times. In other words, their mornings are very much tied to what time we ask them to be in school or get in a car or on a bus. School night sleep duration declines over the adolescent years, so you'll see a precipitous decline over the middle school and high school years. And the size of the school night to weekend discrepancy, in other words, irregularity or this weekend, weekday that I was referring to, as well as insufficient sleep, are all tied to poor school performance, depressed mood, and other negative consequences. This graph, I think, is important to take a look at because you can see that over the years, at least this graph's 2007 to 2021, adolescents have been reporting insufficient sleep. These are high school students, and this is from CDC data, which, by the way, is hard to get access to now. Getting less than, the overwhelming majority of these adolescents getting less than 8 hours of sleep, which is the bare minimum of what adolescents need. And I note COVID here on this slide, and we don't have more recent data beyond 2021 from the CDC. And you can see that it looks like there's some improvement, but that was during COVID when many schools delayed school start time for online learning. And this is some data from the 2017 survey. And the point I just want to make here is that, again, in this case, it's sort of flipping the numbers, but this is showing you the percentage of high school students who managed to get 8 or more hours of sleep. And in 2017, it was only 25%. And you can see there are some discrepancies across races, gender, and this does get worse as kids go through high school. Here in Maryland, and this actually is 22-23 data, you can see that almost 24% of, well, actually, excuse me, the 2022 data is 22.5, and it was a little bit higher than that of middle school or high school students obtaining 8 or more hours of sleep. So again, this is a problem that has not gone away and is national and local. And we have decades, and in the interest of time, I can't possibly go through all of the studies to talk about the changes that occur in sleep and circadian timing that have led us to this passionate desire to delay school start times for middle school and high school students based on science. But I'm going to walk you through briefly some of the key research. And in order to do that, I want to briefly give you some definitions. I could spend a long time on this particular graph, but I want you to understand 2 processes that we talk about in the sleep field. The first is process S, which refers to our sleep pressure or our sleep homeostatic drive. And all this is basically saying is we are either more alert or more sleepy relative to when we last slept. So in other words, if we're only looking at process S, we become, in essence, sleepier the closer we get to, or the longer we get from when we woke up in the morning, so to speak, or when we last slept. But we also have something called process C, or circadian rhythms, or the circadian alerting signal. And that really governs how sleepy or how awake we are relative to our biological clock, which we call the suprachiasmatic nucleus or the SCN. This is really important when we're talking about adolescence, because as you're going to see, there are striking developmental changes in the timing and our actual internal clock for adolescence. We really have three clocks in the world. We have the outside day, night. We have a man-made clock that Sandy referred to or Laura referred to. We just changed to go to daylight savings time. And we have our internal biological clock. So I'm going to now spend time just showing you what changes as we enter adolescence. In fact, very early in the beginning of adolescence, for really at the middle school stage, early, what we call early Tanner stage, as we're beginning, our bodies are beginning to change. There are changes both in the circadian clock and in what we call our homeostatic sleep system that I referred to a couple of minutes ago. So the change to our homeostatic sleep system is basically as twofold. The first is that our need for sleep is stable over the adolescent years. So from about age 10 to age 17 or 18, research clearly demonstrates that there are minimal changes in how much sleep we need. It's not as if as we get closer to college, the college years, we need less sleep than our 10 or 11-year-old siblings or friends or cousins. In fact, the need is close to 9 hours across that age period of time. But also, our sleep pressure basically builds more slowly. And so adolescents perceive sometimes that they are in less need of sleep than their younger siblings do. I sometimes refer to as a sleepover problem. In other words, a fifth grader who sleeps over a friend's house on a Saturday night and then comes home. Parents have sometimes all hell to pay on Sunday because their child is grumpy and impossible to deal with. Whereas the middle school, but particularly the high school student, might not perceive they are as sleep deprived as they are. But our circadian clock also changes. Again, that's this idea that we need bright days and dark nights. It's our internal clock. And our internal clock actually goes through what we call our circadian phase delay. And simply what that means is an adolescent, and again, early in adolescence, is sleepier or ready to fall asleep, or the sleep opportunity is later in the evening and later in the morning than for their younger siblings. We refer to that as the circadian phase delay. It's not as if you can just will yourself to go to sleep as early as you did when you were in fourth or fifth grade. You're not going to be able to fall asleep until later in the evening. And this is just some data from one particular study that really demonstrates what's going on. And I won't go into all the details of the design of the study, but the key take-home message here, and this was a laboratory study where we were able to objectively study adolescents' daytime sleepiness. We were able to see what stage of sleep adolescents go into on a daytime nap. And these were, we studied a group of adolescents a number of years ago, my colleague, Dr. Karskat, and myself and other collaborators. And we were comparing we were following a group of adolescents who, when they were in ninth grade, in this case, it was old junior high school model, 7th through 9th grade. Junior high, as the slide says, started at 8:25 in the morning. And the following fall, when they were in high school started at 7:20 a.m. So that's a really a significant shift in the timing of school, what time they had to clock in. And these students were studied in the lab, and they had no history of sleep disorders, no family history of sleep disorders. And nonetheless, on what we call a nap test, which you're basically kind of allowing someone to try to fall asleep during the day at 8:30 in the morning, 10:30 in the morning, 12:30, and 2:30 in the afternoon. Two really key noteworthy things happened in the fall in high school when they now had this very early school start time. The first was that almost half of the youth, particularly at 8:30 a.m., went into what's called REM sleep. That is abnormal. We see that in highly sleep-deprived individuals or individuals who have a sleep disorder like narcolepsy, so that should not happen. This was too early for them to be in school. And they fell asleep, particularly on the 8:30 and 10:30 nap tests in 5 minutes or under, which suggests extreme daytime sleepiness. So my colleagues and I, particularly Dr. Mary Carr-Scadden, Dr. Stephanie Crowley, myself and others have now referred to this as the perfect storm, what I've just referred to you. So we have these bioregulatory changes that I referred to, changes in process S, changes in process C, and then the range of psychosocial pressures that you're all aware of, wanting to socialize and stay up late, wanting your individual ability to set your own bedtime, school pressures, screen time, and so on. And together, they create this perfect storm where adolescents are getting less and less sleep. And then when we add the societal pressure of early school start times, it becomes the perfect storm. In other words, teenagers are going late to bed, but they're forced to get up early to get to school in the morning, to get on a bus or to get a ride and so on. And so they have short and poorly timed sleep, a mismatch between their biological clock and the school clock. And this leads to numerous consequences such as automobile accidents, suicide risk, depression issues, and other health challenges. And the consequences are enormous, and I could sort of present research on each of these, and some of my colleagues who are speaking tonight will talk about some of these issues in particular, but excessive daytime sleepiness, learning, attention, and memory difficulties, mood instability, impulsivity and aggressive behaviors, substance use, and that might be in caffeine to stay awake, but then something to take in the evening to help you fall asleep, suicidality, motor vehicle accidents, and increased health problems such as more colds and other concerns. And this was a review study done a few years ago, and I just liked the quote. It was a study that examined a range of studies that were looking at insufficient sleep and suicidality in adolescents and adults. But the key kind of comment in this study is just fundamental to what we're talking about this evening. Unlike other suicide risk factors, sleep complaints may be particularly amenable to treatment, to intervention, like delaying school start times, setting developmentally appropriate school start times. And we've known this for now a long time. In fact, as a little side note, I was invited to speak. I don't remember under the exact auspices in Montgomery County. I was not living in Maryland at the time when I was teaching in Massachusetts, in Worcester, Massachusetts, and came down to Montgomery County. I'll have to look up the date, but sometime in the late 90s, I believe, maybe early 2000s. And gave a talk and then gave some workshops in some of the middle schools in Montgomery County. My colleague, really back in 1993, was quoted as saying, "The starting time of school puts limits on the time available for sleep. This is a non-negotiable limit established largely without concern for sleep." In other words, we can change it. And again, Scott and Borgman's Zit's comic, I just love this one where you have these side by side, these teenagers at their lockers. Our school day really needs to start earlier, you think? It really needs to start later, you think? And then the campaign, I love it. Get more sleep, vote for Pierce. My campaign message seems to be resonating with the voters who are all asleep at their lockers. And the rest of my comments are going to share some of the outcome research, some of what we've been able to demonstrate now with the both at a research level and a community level, what happens, the success in delaying school start times. And as has already been mentioned, and you can find this on the Start School Later website now, the list goes on and on of prominent organizations, health and education organizations endorsing later school start times, including the U.S. Surgeon General in 2021 And our own Maryland Sleep Society, as was mentioned at the beginning, most recently has also endorsed delaying school start times. So what are we waiting for? And we have now we have statewide legislation in California and Florida, and hopefully Maryland legislation, perhaps not this year, but I believe we will pass legislation in Maryland hopefully next year. And there are a good 6, 7, 8 states now around the country working to pass legislation. But that does not mean that Montgomery County should not deal with this issue now. The benefits of later school start times are enormous and have now been documented in numerous review papers. And this is just a culmination of the work. When we delay school start times, adolescents generally do not stay up later, so they gain the amount of sleep in the morning because they're able to sleep in later with later school start times, later bell times. They report fewer sleep problems, less circadian misalignment, jet lag, decreased daytime sleepiness. At the school level, reduced tardiness. One study demonstrated 4 times fewer tardies with later school start times, increased attendance, which is a huge issue now locally and around the country, reduced dropout rates, improved standardized testing, improved grades, increased engagement in activities, improved time allocation, and then numerous health benefits, improved mood, improved mental health, decreased delinquent behaviors, improved family well-being, decreased substance use, and economic benefits, because economists have engaged in work related to this push and been able to at least model the economic benefits. If you stay in school, you're more likely to go on to college or some post-college education, more likely to have a good job, and so on. Sorry, I keep moving you all around my screen to move the slides. Okay. And I just want to point something out about COVID. There have been numerous studies, including one that I was a collaborator on, that looked at class start times during COVID. And what's really important are just sort of 2 things I want to point out here, not everything on the slide. The first is that many school districts delayed school start times for online learning and saw the benefits, and this study demonstrated the benefits. In other words, later school start times, or later, morning clock-in times. The adolescents during COVID were able to obtain more sleep. But many school districts then shifted back when COVID ended, when they went back to in-school learning. And that's really the main message I want you to get from this slide. There certainly also is more night-to-night variability when kids were both learning online and having to be at school on certain days. That created a lot of instability as well. This is a social justice issue, and the delaying school start times is a social justice solution. Many of us would argue. We see extensive racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic disparities in sleep in adults and in children and adolescents. I won't read everything on this slide in the interest of time, but I do want to point out a few things. Later school start times, higher test scores have been demonstrated with getting more sleep and having later school start times, as I said. But the magnitude of effect is actually greater for economically disadvantaged students. You're really having a kind of impact on everyone, which you cannot do, which an individual kind of approach to just helping a student improve their sleep is very difficult to accomplish. Delayed school start times, as I already said, are associated with increased attendance and graduation rates, something we're deeply concerned about in many counties, such as Montgomery County. So again, later school start times are a cost-effective, in the long run, strategy to minimize school achievement difficulties and health gaps, particularly for SES disadvantaged students. And I won't, again, in the interest of time, say everything about this slide, but one of my students, and I believe they're here tonight, has been working with other students at looking at data from the 2022 National Household Travel Survey to get a sense of how are adolescents in general in this country getting to and from school. And what I want to highlight from this slide is that often we get caught up when we're thinking about delaying school start times in issues related to bus routes and the timing of bus schedules. But at a national level, 55% of this sample of close to 500 middle and high school students reported that they're using some kind of personal vehicle to get to school, compared to only 33% using buses. And so I think that's really important to pay attention to in this day and age. And what about later release times? Are there other benefits beyond sleep health? And so my colleagues who pay attention to criminal behavior and unstructured time have demonstrated and discussed at length, particularly in a recent ABLE report from the ABLE Foundation in Baltimore, that the immediate hours following the release from school can be a window of opportunity for youth misconduct. In fact, and the timing as well. So youth violence or inappropriate behavior peaks between the hours of 3 or 4 in the afternoon. And by being in school a little later in the morning and later in the afternoon, you're helping to decrease this unstructured time that often leads to problematic behavior, kids basically getting into trouble. And so I can't underscore enough that this is also a really important benefit for Montgomery County and other parts of the country. We've had success around the state already in Anne Arundel County and in Howard County. And we're hoping, if not this year, next year, that we will set statewide guardrails for later school start times for all students in the state of Maryland. I have to acknowledge my numerous graduate students and undergraduates, both currently and in the past, and the list is much longer than this, along with my many colleagues here in Maryland and around the country who I have collaborated with on my work and related projects. Thank you. And I guess we'll take questions later. I think I understand that.
We are going to take a couple of questions now, just to make sure that as we're talking about sleep, everyone stays awake. So, at least for this. We have a question. If we have later start times, won't we get home too late, like elementary schools go home like 30 minutes after middle school?
I'm not sure I understand the question. You mean, will you get out later because you start later? Is that the question?
Yeah, I think so. The shift. They want to understand the shift.
Yeah, so I mean, that's going to vary by school district. Some, and there are probably others here who have more to say about this from Start School Later. That is really not always the case. Some school districts around the country have been able to figure out ways of gaining time within the school day, that they realize that they've wasted some time, maybe too much passing time and so on. So there's not a direct correlation between exactly, starting later and then getting out that much later in the afternoon. It really varies depending on how the school district takes a look at it.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. And I think you are probably our best person to ask here. Someone wants to know, a student wants to know how they can get involved in making schools start later.
I would say you should get in touch with your chat with Sandy in Montgomery County, and or at the statewide level with Lisa Van Buskirk, who was introduced earlier. But if a student wants to talk with me about research and getting involved in research when they get to college or even while they're in high school, they're welcome to email me.
Okay. Anyone who has additional questions, we're going to move on to our next speaker. If you will put them in the Q&A and we will get to them. Any that we don't get to tonight, we will answer in bulk with these slides and the video. So thank you very much, Amy. That was really, really informative, very helpful. And I'm sure there'll be more questions for you as our students ponder that, and our parents as well. So next up is Brian Robertson, and he is going to talk with us some more about a different aspect about sleep and paying attention. What was that? Thank you, Brian.
I'm sorry, I had muted myself and I had a little trouble getting the muting off. So now we're here. Here we go.
It's
Okay, so
officially a
hi.
meeting.
Yeah, right. Can you see my slides? You should be able to see them.
Yes, we can.
Yes. Okay. So, hi, my name's Dr. Brian Robertson. I am a pediatric sleep medicine doctor. I currently work at Kaiser Permanente, and I'm actually going to be joining a practice in Bethesda, Maryland, a pediatric sleep practice there very, very soon. And I have with me my son, so Peter Robertson. He is a 11th grader at Watkinsville High School, and my son Leonardo, who is a 8th grader at Lakelands Park Middle School. So, and I have one other boy who is an elementary school. In Montgomery County. So I've been involved with Start School Later for a while. This is a really great opportunity for me because I want to talk about what's happening in where I live. Um, when I talk to anybody, any person, I always talk about three things that are really important for sleep. So the regularity of sleep is probably the number one thing that's important in getting good sleep. We want to wake up and go to bed at roughly the same time every single day. Now, I know this is hard, and Dr. Wolfson's already talked about this a little bit about how people can have social jet lag. That is sort of the opposite of what we really want to do. What we want to have is regular sleep. We want to have adequate sleep. So the quantity of sleep is going to matter a whole lot too. And then the quality of your sleep matters also. So if you have something that's keeping you awake or interrupting your sleep, for example, like if you lived in a place that there was a lot of noise on the streets outside your home, that might wake you up. If you're a parent and you have a small child, that person's got that little baby might wake you up, and those things are affect your quality. And then other things that are within you. So if you have chronic pain, that's another thing that can affect your sleep quality. But all three things really matter a lot. And when we don't get enough sleep, then we have impacts on our performance, and it's really our mental performance. I was in the Army for a long time, and we always said you can always dig ditches while you're sleepy, but it's really hard to plan and coordinate things when you are like that because you have real deficits in your goal-directed behavior. There's performance lapses, little sleep where you might be doing a task and you accidentally fall asleep for a few seconds. This happens with adults a lot when they're driving. Sleep attacks where you just involuntarily cannot stay awake anymore. The need or desire to take naps very frequently is another problem. And then we also see things like short sleep latency. So if it takes you 30 seconds to fall asleep, that's actually really, really abnormal. It indicates you don't get enough sleep. Slow eyelid closing. If you've ever been in a lecture and someone got bored and they started daydreaming, and if they were a little bit sleepy, you might see them wandering off and slowly closing their eyes and nodding their head down. And even something as simple as intrusive daydreaming, where you really have a lot of trouble staying on task, even if you don't feel like you're sleepy, is another sign that you're not getting enough sleep. I like to talk about driving safety. So, in sleep medicine, nobody dies of anything except behind the wheel of a car, and then it's a real risk. So, if you have this study was done several years ago, but I think it's a good study, and they just compared the amount of errors in driving and the ability to drive safely in people that were drunk and people that were sleep deprived. And it turns out that if you have even just 21 hours of sustained wakefulness, so you're awake, so you get up, wake up at midnight, you have to go somewhere in the middle of the night, by that evening, you're going to have real problems being able to drive safely. And in fact, your performance is going to approximate that of someone who is legally drunk. And it keeps getting worse the longer you're awake. So this is a really important thing to remember. And when I really like this slide. This is a study from Michigan, and I think this is really interesting. So if you have a truck that's traveling down the highway at 60 miles an hour, and they just drift off a little bit, like a 4-degree angle of drift, just a little bit of a drift, within 2 seconds, they're going to be completely off out of the lane that they were in. And this is a real problem because like driving is one of these tasks. It's kind of boring, and you can fall asleep doing it. And people do that all the time. In fact, it's a major reason why people have accidents. The bottom here is just the number of crashes in Michigan. I think it was over like a 6 month period or something like that. What they did is they just counted, they looked and to see what time the crashes happened. And we had this information from police reports, so it's pretty reliable. So what do we see? Well, okay, around 7 or 8 o'clock, there's like this peak number of crashes. Why is that? Well, two things. One, the lots of people on the road because it's rush hour. But the second thing is that if you're sleep deprived or you have what we call a phase delay in your sleep where you're waking up, going to bed late and waking up late, like teenagers often do. Um, this is a time when you're really sleepy still, but you're expected to perform, you're expected to drive, and so we have a lot of crashes. And then it drops off a lot. We see another spike here in the afternoon and evening when rush hour happens. But what's really interesting, I think, on this is this time between midnight and about 6 a.m. So if you've ever been driving in your car from midnight to about 6 a.m., you know that there's nobody on the road. But look at how many crashes we have. And why is that? The reason this is happening is because you should not be driving in the middle of the night. You should be sleeping because you are a human being, and that's what human beings need to do. They need to sleep during the night and be awake during the day. And when you try to invert that, you have unintended consequences, and this is one of them. Sleep quantity is also impacted by just working and traveling. And I like this slide. It's not, we'll talk through it. So we have work time and like this is this red line, and we have travel time, which is this blue line. And so on graph A here, and what we're looking at is how much time people are, um, how much they're working and then how much they're sleeping. So if you work very little, so you're down here on the red line, you can sleep a lot, right? 11 hours a night. If you're working all the time, then you're going to get less sleep, 4, 5, 6 hours of sleep. But travel time matters too. So one of the actually a main determinant, especially where we live in the DC area, of how much people sleep is simply how far away they live from school or work. If you live close, you will get more sleep. If you do not live close, you will get less sleep. Um, and so that's an important thing to remember too. Wake up time also matters too, depending on what you're doing. So, and this is just comparing three groups of people. So people that don't work, people that work less than 8 hours a day, and people that work greater than 8 hours a day. And you see that if you're not working, that's great, right? So you can wake up a little later, and more people will tend to wake up a little bit later, 8 or 9 o'clock. But if you're working, you have to get up early, and we've all experienced this. I had to get up this morning at 6:10 a.m. to go to work. And so that's when I'm in this peak over here, and we're working for about 8 hours. So the people that are working, they get up earlier. But look what time they go to bed. So if you look at graph C, we see that our no work time, our less than 8 hour, and our greater than hour work groups are all going to bed at the same time, right? And what Dr. Wolfson said earlier is very true, which is that it doesn't matter what time you go to bed does not affect really over the long term what time you get up. So if you're waking up really early, you're still going to go to bed at late. If you wake up late, you're still going to go to bed late. People don't adjust their total sleep time because they have to wake up early. Might be another way to put it. All right, this is a tough one. You're going to stick with me. So these are some squares. I debated putting this in there, but I really like this slide because it illustrates my really, really important point and the thing I want you to remember from this. This is an experiment where we put people in a sleep lab and we made them we sleep restricted them. So we had a group, this is the black line. These people got no sleep. They only lasted about a day, day and a half. And then we have a red line where these people are getting only 4 hours of sleep for about 7 days. 6 hours of sleep was the green line. People got 6 hours of sleep for 7 days, and then we have a control group, our 8 hours in the lab, 8 hours of sleep per night in the lab. So in the top right corner is this thing called SSS sleepiness score, and it's just think of it as like this is how sleepy these people are. And so on the first day, well, the people that never got no sleep, they just fell apart really dramatically. But after the first day or so, like the 4 to 6 hour of sleep groups, they got more sleepy. So as time went on, they got more sleepy, but that sleepiness sort of leveled off. And that's really important. That leveled off. So people that are getting 4 to 6 hours of sleep, they get sleepier, and then they don't get infinitely more sleepy. What happens is that that sort of they're just remain sleepy. They're chronically sleepy, and it's not getting worse over time. What is getting worse over time is their performance and performance on several tasks. On our chart A here, that's in the top left corner, shows that this is a measure of attention. So the patient will have to look at a computer screen, and then they have to press a button as fast as they can whenever they see a little light or a number show up. And it's a very sensitive measure of sleep deprivation. And we see that these people that are getting 4 or 6 hours of sleep, their performance on this attention task dramatically worsens over time. And it doesn't stop getting worse. It just keeps going. If you have people that, and then on group C here, these are, and group D, these are math tasks and a ranging letters task. And similar thing happened, especially with our 4 hour group. They basically, things got worse. So on this graph on the y-axis, going down means they performed worse. And we see them performing worse in our 4 and our 6 hour group. On this group, chart D, this task, it's an addition subtraction task. And again, we see worsening performance here. Oh, the take home from this slide, and the take home I want you to remember for what I say tonight, is that subjective sleepiness does not predict how well or badly you're going to perform. It does not correlate. I think that's a really important thing to remember. This is another study. These are people. So these are a bunch of people in a study. And on the left side, we have how sleepy they are. So if you go up the y-axis, you get more sleepy. And then this same task where you have to push a button when you see a little light show up. And again, worsening performance as you go up. Now, on the x-axis, we have all our subjects, and they're all identified by letters. So this is really important. And you can see people that are sort of, we have somebody here that is really sleepy. So subject F here, really sleepy. What our third most sleepy person is subject F. But if you look over here on their performance, you can see that even though he's oh,
Please
so
mute
even though
yourself.
he's
Wait, they already sent out the doc?
oh, okay. So but even though they this person
Did you
is
already
really
open the
sleepy, they
form?
were still able to perform. They were one of our best sleepers here. Um, or sorry, one of our best performers, even though they were really sleepy. But you have other people like this person R, who not very sleepy at all, one of our least sleepy people. And what we see on their performance, we see a really dramatic lack of performance when they get sleep restricted. So there's a lot of inter-individual differences. So one child might be able to handle an early school start time, but there's a lot of other children that can't handle it. And I think that's the other thing you need to remember here. There's lots of impacts of chronic sleep debt. There's neurologic problems, especially with our ability to think clearly, our ability to regulate our emotions. When I'm in the sleep clinic and I have someone that's really sleep deprived, that's the kind of person that gets ticked off at any little thing that goes wrong. That's how you know there's a sleep deprived person, because they have trouble controlling their emotions because they're tired. Um, and we see other things too, like increased substance use and people that don't get enough sleep. There's actually a little bit of increased suicidality. Even things like your ability to perceive pain. So if you have pain in your body somewhere and when you're sleep deprived, you actually perceive the pain as more intense than if you're not sleep deprived. All right, I was told to keep it brief, and I did. So I'm going to pass this back to Laura. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And very, very interesting. I find myself nodding off, usually putting together some presentation or something. But thank you. I appreciate it. Definitely dangerous behind the wheel. And I will be dropping another SSL question in just a few moments. We do have a couple of questions. The one about when we finish this, we have 2 more speakers, and then we'll have Q&A. So I can't give you an exact time, right? One of the questions is, during COVID, when most parents or guardians remained at home, school hours changes did not affect many families, as a good majority of federal and commercial employees or businesses have a return to work policy, adjusting employment hours may not be an option. If we enact later bell times, some parents may not be able to transport their children to school, especially if there is no bus service. We have a transportation study going on now, so hopefully that won't be the case. This would force young kids to go to preschool care. Based on the statistics, this would affect a larger majority of kids. Yeah, this is a rather long question, and I think probably not directed completely at you. But yes, there are challenges, things to address, adjustments to make with childcare and after school activities and all of that. But it can be done. It has been done in other counties, like I said, in the state. And as Amy pointed out, a couple of states have done it statewide. So it's an adjustment, and many of us resist change, right? But what I think we really have to focus on is, especially for tonight, what we're trying to do is talk about the impact it's having on our adolescent health in particular. But I would like to also remind you that if the kids don't have to get up at 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock, depending on how long it takes them to get ready and what time their bus comes, you might get a little bit extra sleep too, as the parents in the home. So it's going to impact everybody. It's going to be a little bit different, but because of falling asleep later, and not even if they go to bed earlier, they're not able to fall asleep in their teens until later. So getting up at 6 o'clock when you couldn't fall asleep until 1 is very challenging, especially as they get into driving. And Dr. Robertson, I was really, really interested in that attention part, and not just behind the wheel, though that is very, very dangerous place to not be paying attention. But in school, in sports, and other things. Maybe you could just reiterate that a little bit.
Yeah, so I can talk more about that. I mean, yeah, like paying attention while you're doing a repetitive, sort of boring task like driving, may not be for our high schoolers yet, but as you progress, or as you get more comfortable driving, it gets to be a really boring thing, and it's what we call an overlearned task. You can almost do it without even thinking. And in fact, every adult here that's listening has probably done this at some point in their life, where they've been driving somewhere and they just realized 15, 20 minutes have passed and they don't even remember those minutes. And it's because they're sort of like checked out mentally. They're just doing this overlearned task that they have to do. So being like alert and aware of what you're doing while you're driving is very, very important. We think that a lot of accidents occur because of sleepiness, and in the sleep medicine specialty, it is a area of real concern for our patients' safety. Especially our patients that have to commute long distances. I can't emphasize enough how important that is. And if you want to know how far is too far, it's about 30 minutes. Generally speaking, if you have your commute is less than 30 minutes, people tend to be more engaged with their community and more involved with their children's lives if their commute is not so long. So I don't know, if your family moves, you might really want to think about exactly how far it is you're going to have to drive, because it's kind of a major impact in your life. So.
Right. And in the DMV, 30 minutes could be 3 miles, but on some days, depending on where you are.
Sometimes, right. Yes. Sometimes.
Amy has a question for you, or an answer for that.
Yeah, I don't have a question. I just want to underscore for the audience here that the group that there are developmental sort of or age differences in risk for sleepy driver and fall asleep at the wheel motor vehicle accidents. And in fact, adolescents and recent high school graduates are in the age group that is at the greatest risk for such kinds of car accidents. I can't underscore that enough.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. And that's why we see the insurance. One of the reasons we see the insurance rates so high. The sleepiness, the risk taking behavior, learning, being inexperienced, nervous. There was enough going on without being tired on top of it. And even some nighttime accidents where kids will go to prom or something and they'll think that they have a safe ride home, but the person gets really tired and it's extremely dangerous. So, okay. Well, thank you for that. And please keep putting those questions in the Q&A. And if you're having any issues with the forms or any of that in the chat, that is working great. And now we're going to turn it over to Joanna. Joanna Fong Isaria Wong. Hope I got that.
Thank you, Laura.
Right.
So let me
You've
share
got
my
the coolest
screen.
job in the world for some of you. I think you're going to really enjoy this one.
All right, so let me first make sure that you guys are seeing my screen.
Yes, we are.
Okay, perfect. Let me launch the PowerPoint. And let's just swap this one. You're seeing the full screen?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So we're going to talk about why sleep is such a game changer for athletic success. So I'm a neurologist by training, but I'm a sleep specialist, and I'm a consultant for the Steelers. So, the role that I'm most passionate about and most proud of is being a sleep health advocate. So, just to educate and raise the awareness of sleep among the general public, particularly in these high risk populations. So certainly our children and adolescents, but also our essential worker, public transportation sector, and also athletes of all level. And that's what we're going to focus on today. So it's not a secret to elite athletes. Sleep is really a secret weapon to peak performance. And, the reason is very simple because sleep really gives them an edge to succeed. So we're going to go over some of the basics, science and evidence behind this. So when we fall asleep is not an on and off event. First of all, actually, it's very nicely structured. We go through different sleep stages. We go through light sleep, deep sleep, and then we dream, and that's the REM sleep. And we cycle through these stages about 4 to 6 times a night. And they serve different function. So when we do dream, it's the time for us to consolidate our memory. So it's very important for learning. It is also the time for us to process emotion. And that's the reason why there's such strong correlation between sleep deprivation and mental health issue, including depression, anxiety, and suicide. Stage 2 sleep may be very important for muscle memory. I changed the picture to the Ravens tonight, so hopefully that make the audience happier. Now, slow wave sleep is very important for restoration. It is the time for our body to make human growth hormone. It's the time for us to also for our muscle and our bone to kind of heal the cells to have that recovery time. When it comes to immune system, deep sleep is really the time for our immune system to get to work, survey the body for infection, and also it reduces inflammation in the body. There's another process that happen during deep sleep or slow wave sleep, something called lymphatic system. So it's kind of like lymphatic system in the body from the lymph node, but this is in the brain. So lymphatic with a G in front is a mechanism for our brain to flush out waste product and neurotoxic protein. And that's the reason why when we get a good night of sleep, we wake up feeling refreshed, ready to go. So sleep is really a critical component of athletic performance, but also recovery. So let's go through some of the data that we know. Without diving in too deep, I want to just show you that when we don't sleep enough, it hurts our endurance, our reaction time, accuracy, speed, strength. And when we do sleep more, we actually do perform better. So this study actually looking at NCAA player, basketball player, And what they did was just basically ask them to extend their sleep from their usual 7.5 hours to 10, a little bit more than 10 hours for 5 to 7 weeks. And what they found was that sleep extension actually improved their speed. It also improved their accuracy in terms of throw, three-pointer, and also faster reaction time when it comes to the psychomotor vigilant task. And when it comes to injury, sleeping, adequate sleep, so in this case is more than 8 hours, actually is protective. It reduced the risk for injury by 61%. And it's not just injury in the muscle, the bone, the joint, but also concussion. If you have problem with sleep, in this case, sleepiness in daytime, or having insomnia, you have 3 times more likely to have concussion. And if you have both symptoms, that's 15 times more likely. If you do have injury, sleep is very important for speedy recovery. And you may want to know, like, why sleep helps with recovery. Well, it's actually related to all the things that I already mentioned. The human growth hormone is very important for recovery, and also the immune system, inflammation, the pain threshold that Dr. Robertson mentioned earlier. All these things can really affect your ability to participate in rehab and recover. And this is also about cognitive performance. This is a similar study that Dr. Robertson actually showed earlier. When you do stay up for prolonged period of time or sleep deprived, you do have degradation or reduction of your cognitive and motor function. And that's important for athletic skills, decision-making skill, your ability to see the field, see the court, see the ball. So, I think the first step to change is having the awareness, and in this case is having the sleep awareness. And we have to delay school start time for our teens, because it matters to not only their athletic performance, but everything else: school success, mental health, safety. And that's all I have. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Do we have any questions? Okay. I do have one. Does getting more sleep in sports after injury help you recover better, as in better performance after injury, or does it just help you recover quicker? Interesting.
Yeah, it's everything. It helps you to recover quicker, allow you to return to play quicker. And not only just the physical part of recovery, but also cognitively. So yeah, and that's related to, lower inflammation in your body, better human growth hormone so that you can repair your muscle, your joint, all these things.
All right. Yes, it's there's a reason they tell you to rest, heal. And because the better you heal, I mean, it makes sense. The better you heal, the better you're going to be afterwards. Many of us don't give ourselves time to heal, and we're never quite the same. So that's wonderful. Thank you very much. Our last speaker is Lisa, and she is with Start Schools Maryland chapter. And I will turn it over to her, and some of your other questions, particularly yours, Ricky, you might get the answer for that here, or some inclination, but that's a question that's really good for Lisa. Also, keep the questions coming. If you have any more questions, you can put them in the Q&A. If you're having issues with any of the forms or anything, in the chat. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Laura. I'm Lisa, and I'm from Anne Arundel County, and I've been the chapter leader in Anne Arundel County for nearly a decade at this point. An advocate for just a little bit longer. I'm going to start with a wider lens for what's going on across Maryland, and then I'll focus in a little bit more closely on some issues that and some lessons learned from Anne Arundel County and opportunities then for Montgomery County. Make sure I advance this. So the average start time across all of Maryland for your high schools is 7:57. Middle schools is 8:17. I don't have, and I collected that data myself because the State Department of Education does not collect that. I didn't do the average elementary school start times because there's just too many of them and I didn't feel like looking them all up. But the range for elementary in Maryland is from 7:30 to nearly 9:30. The private schools start a little bit later than our public schools, and the charter schools even later. In 2014, Maryland was the first state in the nation to pass any legislation related to school start times, and it was a study between a joint study between the Department of Education and the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, which is now just the Department of Health. And it recommended that school systems conduct feasibility studies to start school after 8 a.m. They did not go so far as to recommend a state mandate, but they did acknowledge that in preserving the status quo, whereby school start times are a matter for each local jurisdiction, the state risks letting local resistance trump a strong body of scientific evidence that sleep is critical to health and academic achievement. And you've just had 3 wonderful doctors explain to you that all of that evidence about the criticalness of sleep to health and academic achievement. In 2016, former Maryland delegate Aruna Miller sponsored legislation, the Orange Ribbon for Healthy School Hours, which would acknowledge and recognize school systems that had moved school start times. There was 3 levels of recognition. The lowest level, if you had like a study or a task force or work group. The middle level would be if you had made some sort of change for school start times, with the highest level being no elementary school before 8, no middle or high school before 8:30, and some restrictions on the bus pickups. But unfortunately, although there have been school systems eligible for various levels, nobody has applied for it. And so it's not quite a very successful legislation. But then last year and this year, Delegate April Miller, a former Board of Education member from Frederick County, sponsored legislation. And this year it was co-sponsored by Senator Joanna Benson from Prince George's County. And it would follow along with some of the criteria set by California and Florida to have no middle school before 8 and no high school before 8:30. And you might say to yourself, well, but didn't we just have people advocating for 8:30 or later? And yes, that is the recommendations from 11 years ago, that both middle and high school should start after 8:30. This becomes then where policy meets the scientific recommendations. And so unfortunately, it becomes a political compromise. So there were hearings by the respective committees in the House and the Senate in February and March, including some wonderful testimony by 3 Montgomery High School students in the March testimony before the Senate. But unfortunately, just because of the way the compressed schedule was, the legislation did not make it out of committee, but there's always next year. And this legislation was supported by groups across the state. So who has changed start times in Maryland? As some of you know, in 2016 and 2017, Montgomery County delayed their high schools from 7:20 to 7:40, with elementary and middle schools delayed 10 minutes to your current start time. Anne Arundel County was a year behind and did a small change of high school, but delayed 13 minutes to 7:30, and our elementary and middle schools were delayed 15 minutes, with then a wholesale change in 22-23 to have all of our elementary schools start at 8, high school at 8:30, and middle school at 9:15. And I'd like to point out that this was a cost neutral implementation, and I will go into that a little bit more later. Howard County was now a year behind us. They did high school at 8, middle school at 8, 8:40, and elementary schools at 8:40 and 9:15. But due to some busing issues with a new contractor and some other transportation operational issues, the superintendent ended up widening the delivery window and bumping high school a little bit earlier and some elementary schools a little bit later. So now their window of delivery is between 7:50 to 9:25. The Board of Education in Howard County asked for an estimate to compress the schedules back to their 8 to 9:15, And Howard County told them 2 months ago that it will cost $6 million to compress the schedule, but they could flip the tiers at no cost. So we'll see if they ever decide to change the tiers. Harford County started some initial discussions late last month, as Frederick County is also, although they've been discussing it since 2003, will be having a new work group that was supposed to start earlier this school year. And their goal is that no Frederick County school system would start before 8 a.m. There have also been 2 school systems that have moved earlier. Both Prince George's and Baltimore City have moved their first tiers for their schools to as early as 7:30. And the way both of those school systems are set up, they have elementary, middle, and high schools all starting at that first tier. So they now have students of all ages going even earlier. Baltimore City is especially unique because their students have school choice, so they may intentionally choose to go to a school for middle or high school that is across town, and then they rely on the public transportation to get there. So they have longer commutes than the rest of the state's suburban school districts. And as a result of Baltimore City, then there was the Able Foundation report, of which Dr. Wolfson was the primary researcher, and you can Google that. And that's also why in this past fall, there was a national conference on school start times at Loyola University, hosted by Dr. Wolfson and her colleagues. So now we'll get a little bit into more we know why we should change, but how do we actually make that happen? And so Dr. Wolfson talked about the achievement gap. These are 2 studies here from Seattle, Washington, and also another one that she referenced that just is showing the improvements to attendance and graduation rates as a way to close the achievement gap. I'll skip over these because we kind of already mentioned this. Dr. Wolfson also talked about the impact to juvenile justice, risky behavior taken by sleep-deprived adolescents. And I'd like to point out that Secretary Sam Abed of Maryland's Department of Juvenile Services was one of the first people in Maryland to recommend later end times to minimize hours that adolescents are unsupervised way back in 2018. In 2020, and I'll talk about this a little bit more, Anne Arundel County had a gun violence prevention task force, and their final report recommended that the county could improve mental health and decrease risk behaviors among adolescents by promoting increased sleep through healthy school start times. This is a chart that I'll skip through, but you can see that the blue is the spike of the teen crime this is from the US Department of Justice in those hours after school. So you might say, well, that's great. That's all about middle school students. What about elementary school students? What happens to them? And the research is not as clear of what is the perfect time for elementary. It's not studied as well, but anecdotally, most parents of elementary school students would say that their students are awake early in the morning. So then they could be the first to go to school, or they could be later, because right now we have schools that start in Maryland for elementary between 7:30 and 9:30. So what is normal in your district varies. The childcare needs for families vary dramatically if their school starts at 7:30 or if they start at 9:30, about whether you need before care, after care, or both before and after care. And so this is when the times that elementary schools start becomes part of a community conversation, because schools are not going to match the needs of working parents, just this number of hours and the various schedules they have. So one of the conversations you can have is, what is the safe time for morning bus pickups and afternoon drop-offs? And this applies for every age. It doesn't make it any safer for a 15-year-old to be out on the waiting for a bus at 6 o'clock in the morning as it is for a 5-year-old. Nobody should be in the dark waiting for a pickup. So in Anne Arundel County, in 2017, as we were moving for our 15-minute shift of later bell times for elementary, one of our elementary schools that already started at 9:25 came and testified before the Board of Education that their 9:25 start time was not age appropriate for their Title I school, predominantly because this was outside of Fort Meade. And so the military daycares were starting at 6 a.m., which means that there was demand by the parents to be able to drop off their students and their children at 6 a.m. But then there was potentially up to 3 hours before school started. So the students were up early to get to daycare and then were tired by early afternoon, but they still had several hours of school left. And so those tired students were not staying for some Department of Defense funded after school programs. So they were asking for a special relief to not have to then move to a 9:40 start time. But unfortunately, we did move to a 9:40, and there was also a elementary school nearby that moved as late as 9:45. And so because of those late elementary school start times, that was a justification for why then we moved all of our elementary schools to an 8 a.m. start. We'll get into that in a little bit more. When we talk about transportation, we talk about what time the buses pick up, but we also need to talk about what time do those buses get to school and what time do those schools open their doors. So in 2019, before the pandemic hit, I was able to get information about, for Anne Arundel County, what time their buses were picking up and what time their buses were scheduled to arrive at school. And based on some conversations with transportation experts, anything more than 20 minutes before school started was kind of getting on the edge of a little too early. So I looked at how early some buses were getting there. And you can see in the red that there was a bus getting to to a high school that was starting at 7:30 as early as 6:45. So 45 minutes before school started, students were getting to school. And those doors to get into the school didn't open until 7:15. So what were those students doing for those half hour waiting for those buses to open, right? So that's not a good use of anybody's time. And you can see there's a couple schools where 95, 97% of their students were getting to school more than 20 minutes before school started. People will ask, well, what about students that need to work? And if they need to work, they absolutely need to work. But we also need to acknowledge that there are restrictions from the Department of Labor about what time and how much students can work, such that your 14 and 15-year-olds can really only work 3 hours a day and have to be done by 7 p.m. And so then your 16 and 17-year-olds have are less restricted in their hours. But I'd like to point out there is a caveat that they deserve 8 hours of consecutive non-work and non-school time in a 24-hour period. So the labor laws are acknowledging the need for a minimum amount of non-work, non-school time so that they can sleep. And we can compare and contrast that to what time do school activities and sports end for high school students for those same 14 and 15-year-olds that can't work past 7 p.m. during the school day or school year. What about athletes? Well, obviously, Dr. Joanna talked about all the reasons for sleep, and let's talk about their schedules for those athletes. And sometimes those athletes may get out of school at 2:30, but then they have to wait for their coaches. How long are they waiting for coaches? Well, it depends if their coach is part of their school system or if they're coming from another school or from another job. And so this is a comparison I did in 2020, comparing a Loudoun County school student who was a cross-country runner. Her school started at 9:15 versus Anne Arundel County, which was starting at 7:30 at the time. And the Loudoun County student had the potential for 8.5 hours of sleep, assuming that both students fell asleep at the same amount of time and then woke up relatively before school the same amount of time, versus the Anne Arundel County student could only probably get about 6.5 hours of sleep. And you'll say, but shouldn't that Loudoun County student be doing more homework? And there was a great quote from Dr. Judy Owens, who says it takes a sleepy student 5 hours to do 3 hours of homework. And that kind of makes sense if you think about if you're kind of zoning off during one of your classes and not really paying attention, then your homework that night, you kind of have to teach yourself everything that you missed during that day. So you are taking a little bit more time to do your homework. So this is not applicable to every student and every family, but it just highlights the potential sleep for one student that starts at 9:15 versus one that starts at 7:30. So what was Anne Arundel County's process? So if we go back in the records, and I had a great colleague who was able to find all kinds of articles, and really way back in the 1960s, school started at about 9 o'clock for everybody. And eventually it just crept earlier by 10 minutes here, 8 minutes here, 15 minutes. And that was just to add more clock time, because then there became a standard of how many hours of school per level they're needed. Or, oh, if we could save money by shifting this school later or moving this school earlier for busing. And so eventually Anne Arundel County ended up at 7:17 a.m., which was the earliest school system in Maryland that had all of its schools starting that early. So beginning in the late 90s, shortly after that shift to 717, then there was a great deal of advocacy by student groups and the Citizen Advisory Committee. There was a vote by the Board of Education that they couldn't agree on any plan. And then, not so coincidentally, Anne Arundel County formed Start School Later as a national organization with a chapter for Start School Later following shortly thereafter. And I forget the exact year that Start School Later Montgomery County formed, but it was around in 2011, 2012. So Montgomery County was one of the first chapters, along with Anne Arundel County, to form a chapter. In 2014, Anne Arundel County had a task force where they had cost estimates ranging from $600,000 to do a 30-minute delay to $9 million for a major overhaul of school start times. So all kinds of discussions about what is the best. The superintendent requested $8 million, and the Board of Education, faced with many other budget priorities, opted to reduce it to $600,000. And that $600,000 was eventually used to delay the high school's 13 minutes to 7:30 and all those schools 15 minutes. They didn't do the full 30 minutes that $600,000 could have provided because they are already picking that elementary school as late as 9:45. And if they had done 30-minute slide for everybody, now that elementary school wouldn't have started till 10. And that was too much for elementary, or too late for that elementary. So in 2018, due to some other factors, Anne Arundel County was shifting from an appointed school board members to elected school board members. And I did a lot of community outreach to those people running for office in 2018 and 2020. And many people were elected because they wanted to change school start times. And one of the first things the partially elected school board did was they had a CPS hire a transportation consultant to really look at their transportation system. And it wasn't just about school start times, but it was about all kinds of operations, such that when the report was released in January of 2020, bell times was just one of 27 recommendations. There's a lot of other things that school system could do to reduce its legacy ways of doing work and some inefficiencies in its operations. But in that bell time recommendation, it was hypothesized that they could implement different bell times at a cost-neutral position because there was so many inefficiencies. So basically, the school start times that they estimated in 2014 would cost $8 to $9 million, assumed a perfectly efficient transportation system, but that is not what Anne Arundel County had. They basically were able to save, if you will, $8 to $9 million by improving their transportation routing. Now, Montgomery County has hired a transportation consultant, and they've started, or I think they've done like a first phase of a transportation analysis, and there is potential to build upon that. So that's an opportunity for Montgomery County. So shortly after this report was released in January 2020, there was a fabulous meeting with the consultant on March 10th. And as you can see, 2 days later, the enthusiasm was overtaken by events by the closure for COVID-19, which was disappointing, of course. But the benefit was, as Dr. Wilson talked about, Anne Arundel County shifted its middle and high schools to starting their online learning to 8:30 a.m. And so there are many challenges with the online learning, but school start times for Anne Arundel County was not one of them. Now, also in the fall and summer of 2020, there were several other initiatives begun by the county that came to fruition with their reports. There's a gun violence prevention task force that I recommended that included a recommendation of school start times. There was a mental health task force that omitted a reference to school start times. My hypothesis is the Department of Health was in charge of the gun violence prevention task force, and the school was in charge of the mental health task force. Because how can one organization recommend school start times for the mental health benefits, then a mental health task force omits that? But it was an opportunity for me to highlight the need for mental health as part of the task force. There was also the joint initiative to eliminate the opportunity gap, and that acknowledged that transportation was a barrier to equity. Because if a student misses the bus at any age and their family does not have an alternative means to get them to school, they may miss that day of school or have to spend a lot of money on a taxi or an Uber or a Lyft or whatnot, and they may opt just not to go to school. So transportation is a barrier, and it is an equity issue. So fast forward a little bit, once we got through some of the drama over COVID, we were able to re-engage with some of the other education priorities, and the board set a parameter of start times of elementary school starting sometime between 8 and 9. Middle school would start sometime between 8:30 and 9:15, and high school at 8:30. I'd like to contrast this with Howard County did not set specific parameters when they were pursuing their school start times. A lot of reasons why, but they did not. I would recommend that the Board of Education for Montgomery County should set parameters of what the Board of Education, based on the available research, believes would be age-appropriate start times for elementary, middle, and high school. And those could always be adjusted based on operational considerations, but it is clearly delineating what the community thinks are healthy, safe, and age-appropriate for all hours, for all students. ACPS rehired the consultant to actually do the routing, and MCPS could expand their current transportation contract to include school start times more explicitly. The consultant then reported that cost-neutral start times were achievable, and then they actually started to do the heavy lifting, including actually using the transportation routing software that ACPS had purchased in 2015, but still was not using. But MCPS is probably has gotten their bids back or soon for purchasing new transportation routing software. So this is a good opportunity as they are learning their new transportation routing software to actually then use that routing software for new bell times. So I forgot to mention that originally the Board of Education for Anne Arundel County had wanted an implementation no later than mid-year. Mid-year ended up not working because the bus routes were not ready and the community was not adequately prepared. So they ended up delaying it to a fall of 2022 implementation. In February 22, they released the initial bell times, and the school system hosted a childcare fair to connect families and providers once we knew what the tentative bell schedule was going to be, because those schools that had started at 9:30 or 9 o'clock, they needed different childcare arrangements if they only needed aftercare versus needing before and aftercare. So the school system helped coordinate that. In June of 2020, the finalized bell times were released with some videos, websites, and there was a major education outreach effort by ACPS, and they did a great job of reaching out to every family in the school system. They used their bilingual facilitators a great deal, and really reached out. And one of the things they were trying to do that ended up not being as successful, and I believe it's because of the messaging, is they were asking, like, you are eligible for a bus seat for your student. Are you actually going to use that? And I think the messaging scared people into requesting a seat for their student or keeping that seat for a student, even though they probably, some of them were never going to have their students ride the buses for whatever reason, but they wanted that in an emergency. And so it was not as successful as a goal had been to like reduce the unused seats so that they could be more effective in their routing. And it didn't work as well as they had hoped. And I think that was down to messaging. So making sure that families were aware that, yes, you could change your request for a seat or no seat on a bus based on changing family conditions, new jobs, whatever, moving, obviously, could have been better communicated. When routing, for those who don't know, the routers typically assume that there are 3 elementary students per seat and then only 2 middle or high schoolers per seat, so that if you're routing a bus for the multiple levels, you can obviously carry more elementary students than you can a middle or high school one, which are things that I learned through this process. So come August 2020, we're implementing new school start times, but we do have 80 bus driver vacancies. So the community is understandably upset because we're coming out of COVID. People who had been bus drivers retired, etc. So the new superintendent was able to use some emergency contracting and a new Maryland law that allowed alternative vehicles such as vans and SUVs that did not require a commercial driving license that the big yellow school buses do, to allow them to transport a small number of students, excuse me, such as to non-public placement, those that required IEPs, McKinney Venuto homeless students, to free up the larger school buses that had otherwise been transporting only a handful of students. And by the end of the school year, through an intensive recruitment outreach effort to recruit more bus drivers in concert with the county executive and the county council and some of the resources the county was able to bring as well. Nearly all of the routes were covered. And then by the 23 school year, all of the bus routes were covered. And the school system is now using that alternative vehicle driving system to allow people to have a job and then kind of use it as a ladder. If they are interested in pursuing a CDL, then they can use that as a full-time job and then be pursuing their CDL later. And at this point, there's no complaints about school start times. Such to the point of at the October conference, Dr. Bedell, the superintendent, was able to come and give a presentation. He's a fabulous speaker. And he's pointed out that Anne Arundel County School doesn't have any problems, and our attendance rates over the last 2 years have increased. When we have a system designed in the best interests of adults first, rather than doing what's right by children, then we do a lot of harm. And our school board made a conscious decision that we weren't going to make decisions to satisfy an adult-centered agenda. 2 years of data have shown significant promise that this was a good move, and I've won more state athletic championships in the 2 years since the change than in my 6 years of a previous superintendent position. And so AACPS attendance and graduation rates have been were more recently released in the most recent MSDE report, and they've continued to improve. And since Dr. Bedell gave this presentation, we had one of our schools won a football state championships for the first time in like 30 years. And 2 weeks ago, one of our girls basketball teams won state athletic championships. So moving later bell times maybe doesn't guarantee that you're going to win state championships, but it is proof that our athletic systems didn't die just because the students got out an hour later. And as a matter of fact, with our 9:15 school start times for middle school, just this spring, we have started a middle school athletic program as a pilot program to have after school soccer. So even though those schools now release at 3:55, they are still having athletic activities for those middle school students. So sports didn't die just because we started school a little bit later. Here's some information that I was able to get from Mr. Mosier, the spokesperson, following Dr. Bedell's presentation, that shows that the attendance rate improved and the chronic absentee rate was going down as we moved from the post-pandemic with all of our bus driver vacancies to a period where there were no bus driver vacancies and our best attendance and our smallest chronic absentee rate. There's also a really good report from 2 weeks ago on WMAR2 about Baltimore City and also about chronic absenteeism in Maryland. And I'm going to end it there because I've been talking long enough. So back over to you, Laura.
Wow. Thank you very much. That was fantastic. We have a couple of questions. One was, you mentioned that Baltimore City, and I believe you said Howard County, but I could be wrong, moved their times earlier. And the question from a student was, why would anybody move their start times earlier?
Yeah, so that was Prince George's County that moved their start times earlier. It's fine. There's a lot of counties. So Baltimore City's excuse for why they moved school start times earlier, and obviously Dr. Wolfson can talk more about this, was they said that they needed to do it because they had bus driver shortages. But they only provide bus transportation for elementary students who don't live or, who are outside of a walking zone to their neighborhood schools. By the time they get to middle and high school, they are not provided with school bus transportation unless you are a student with special needs, have an IEP that requires it or whatever. So they said it was for bus transportation, but that doesn't apply to like 80% of the students of Baltimore City. So it's like many things. Why did Anne Arundel County move from 9 o'clock to 7:17? Ostensibly to add some more clock time and basically to save money on various routing. So Prince George's County was trying to standardize into like 3 specific tiers. They had like 5 tiers of start times. So they were standardizing, and I advocated, of course, to not move quite so early because now they, like I mentioned, they have both Prince George's and Baltimore City have students of all ages starting at their first tier. They have a mixed tier throughout, but they also have then for both of those school systems, elementary, middle, and high schools that start after 9 o'clock as well. So they do have some students who do have age appropriate start times and some students that do not. And so that becomes an equity issue as well. So.
Yes, absolutely. And speaking of equity issues, can you speak a little bit about Anne Arundel County and how they've handled special education transportation and start times? Because I know here there are very large buses covering the entire county that arrive at school with 4 kids on them that have been on the bus for 2 hours.
Yeah, right. So they do not have efficient routes because they are driving all over to deliver students to special programs. And so that's a success for Anne Arundel County. It's unfortunate because of the driver shortage that really prompted this, but it was state legislation that had changed in 2021 that then was effective through the State Board of Education adopted the regulations in January of 22 that allowed school systems the option of using passenger vans or SUVs, anything less than a 10-person capacity to transport students. So instead of using that large yellow school bus to pick up a handful of students, then they could be in hopefully a more comfortable vehicle. And it didn't necessarily mean that they had a shorter route, but it freed up a large bus that then could take 40 middle school students or 60 high school students. And that's also the bus that then can be used for the 3 tiers, because depending on how long that bus was traveling for those special needs students, that may have been like their only trip for that day, because they couldn't necessarily be reused, especially if they're going, say, from Anne Arundel County to the School of the Deaf. That's kind of their only trip for that bus, just because of the length and the distance and trying to do that. So the alternative vehicle program has really been a success for Anne Arundel County. And I'm very thankful that the legislature changed that law, and it worked out really good timing for Anne Arundel County to use it. And that was actually one of the recommendations from the report from Prismatic Services, the contractor. Their first recommendation, number 1, was change the law to allow smaller vehicles, because otherwise it was a single person taxi or a big yellow school bus, and there was no option for in between. So now there are options. And so I would encourage Montgomery County to look into that and expand that program. I know that Howard County is also trying to expand their use of the alternative vehicles as well.
Yeah. Wow. That would be amazing, because 2 hours on a bus each way, and that's assuming it doesn't break down because of the older buses.
And it's also the challenge with the yellow school buses is that requires a commercial driver's license, and it's not just getting a CDL. Then you need additional endorsements to be able to transport passengers and children. So not everybody, people might choose to get oftentimes the CDL license. Training can be free if you say you're going to be a bus driver, but then people don't take that bus driver because it's an inconsistent schedule of early mornings and late afternoons with this gap in the middle. So it's not a great full-time job, versus I could go drive a dump truck and work, 7 to 3 and be done every day. So you have to be a special person to be a bus driver. And I'm thankful for those that are, because, they are an important part. The school day starts when students leave their door. That's there's even a great quote from I think it was Michelle Obama. Is that who it was? Sandy? No, Vice President Harris. Sorry. It talks about the school day starting when students leave their door. And so whether that's they're walking to school or they're taking bus or they're taking public transportation, however they're getting to school, that's when their day starts. So we are appreciative of the bus drivers that get them to school safely.
Great. Thank you. Amy, yes. And if I could just real quick, I put the link in the chat for the SSL form. You have until 9 p.m. tomorrow to fill that out, and it will close. So I will compare those with the login reports, the registration, the forms the little quizzes that we did throughout, and award those SSL hours. If you have had any issues with it, please stay on afterwards. We're going to hear from Amy, and then we're going to take some live questions.
Oh, I just wanted to briefly say, as I said very briefly, but I didn't spend a lot of time on that point. Never did I think, as a psychologist, I would be looking at transportation, but I've been involved in 2 transportation projects this year with collaboration with my undergraduates. And it's really clear both from the data perspective and at a national level, state regulations that one, the issue of increasingly more states are going with this idea of other forms of vehicles, as Lisa was talking about, and it's been successful in Anne Arundel County. And keep in mind that far fewer students in general are using buses to get to school. And so I would certainly encourage Montgomery County to really carefully look at that. You have to obviously deal with equity issues and make sure everyone has a way of getting to and from school. But I think that's sort of been kind of a barrier that needs to be overcome and paid more attention to.
Yes, definitely. A little bit earlier when Amy was finishing up, I put a link to a discussion from a student in Anne Arundel County about what was going to change. This was just before the school year started. So hopefully you'll have a chance to watch that as well. So I would love to open up the floor for questions. If anybody has one, just now you get to raise your hand and ask your question yourself. Or Sandy, you put something in the chat that I don't think everyone said. If you want to come off mute and share
Yes,
that.
I'm Sandy Landis again, the Montgomery County chapter leader for Start School Later and the MCC PTA Bell Time Subcommittee Chair, because both issues are so synergistic. But when Lisa was speaking about Anne Arundel's experience with the new regulations allowing different size buses, this is really critical for us in MCPS, and it's really critical right now. I've been testifying about this for the past few years to our county council and the Board of Ed, but the use of alternative transportation, meaning vehicles other than the big yellow buses, has tremendous implications for us here. And it's one more reason that we need MCPS to look into this. As part of their routing study, they're about to award a contract for transportation routing. And this would be a perfect thing to go along with it, even though it's not directly needed to put GPS on the buses, but they can be doing this part of the study based on a snapshot today of where students are going versus where they're living, and looking at the mix and types of vehicles that we're using and get a ballpark estimate of what it would take to do this with optimal types of vehicles. We also have a boundary study going on and a program study going on where we're looking at the different specialty programs we offer and how we can ensure that all students who are interested can get to them. So there are 3 studies happening. We're spending base level funds on them, and we're not asking for this piece, to my knowledge, although we haven't put out all of these RFPs. So this is the critical moment to request that we look at this as part of these studies and make sure that we can meet the health and well-being and achievement of our teens, so that we can at least know what would it take to do this. The other big advantage that we have here in Montgomery County is that we have a robust transportation system. We have Metro, we have Ride On, and we have Metro buses, and our students can ride these for free using their student IDs. So as part of Ride On Reimagined, we've had groups of parents write to both Rockville and the Ride On Reimagined people, as well as to MCPS, to suggest that we make sure that these buses that we're running anyway go to our schools. Sometimes there's a bus stop maybe 3 blocks from a school. There's no reason not to route it past the school. And that becomes an equity issue for parents if they have a sick child, if a child misses the school bus and they can take the Ride On. So there's a whole lot of advantages to looking at this and leveraging the assets we have to have the outcome we desire.
Excellent points. And I will also say that there are some schools where I have observed that the ride-on bus stops on the opposite side of the street. So you see students jumping off the bus and running into the school to not be late, or at the end of the day, running out of the school and straight across the street into traffic to get on the bus and not miss it and have to wait for the next one. So those are the kinds of things that if we do this synergistically, as you said, we can correct some of those issues. And, that's one of those risky behaviors that maybe sleep is impacting. Running out into the street and traffic is not a great idea. So,
in addition to the transportation analysis that Dr. Wolfson and her students did for the ABLE Foundation report, which I encourage everyone to Google, because while it's specific to Baltimore City, all the research is applicable to Montgomery County and the whole rest of the nation as well. There are some specific uniqueness about Baltimore City, but so in addition to her transportation analysis, there was actually a really good analysis by the Baltimore Banner about their use of public transportation. And exactly to your point, Laura, of trying not to miss that bus and then having to wait for the next one is particularly challenging in Baltimore City. But for any use of public transportation is a challenge, for adults taking it as well, trying to, minimize the changeovers. But the Baltimore City had an excellent analysis of that as well.
yeah, and if anyone has the link for that study, can drop in the chat, that'd be great, because we will share the resources that we gathered in here with the recordings and the slides.
Are we talking about the Baltimore Banner article, or we're talking about the ABLE study?
The ABLE study.
Oh yeah,
No, yes.
I'll get the ABLE study link. I have that.
Yes, it's probably linked in the Banner story.
Yeah, it is probably, but that's right.
Yeah, but not well. I wish they had done a better job of it. They should have.
Okay.
They
Right.
should have done
Right.
better.
Right.
But that's for a different topic.
Yeah.
I will just add one other thing here, and that is that I've had parents write to me asking if we could pitch in as parents and pay for our own transportation study here. And I just want to put this out for everybody, and that is Montgomery County Public Schools has all the data. So we could look at neighborhoods and we could look at schools, but MCPS knows where they have special ed students who are going up county when they live down county. They know who's in a magnet program when they live in the east side of the county and they're going to the west side of the county and vice versa. So even if parents were able to pool the money, MCPS has all the data. MCPS has to, and there's privacy issues with student data for things like this. But this is where the rubber hits the road and the devil is in the detail. So we need to work with MCPS and encourage them to look at this for all our benefit. And frankly, if I were the new superintendent or the old superintendent, I would definitely want to see the benefits, because they can take the bow. 9% increase in graduation rates, 2 to 3% increase in test scores, less suicides, less violence. These are all issues that the school system is confronting every day, when what they really want to do is teach, and what our students really want to do is be available to learn. So anything that's spent looking at transportation and figuring out how to do this will pay back its results and dividends for years to come, and for the whole community down the road.
So I'm not seeing any hands or questions, but I do have another one for you. Would you say that when we hear these comments about there's, it's $20 million, $60 million, all these numbers that float around costs to do this switch to start schools later, how much of that would you estimate is in the transportation study that we're already doing? If we had to do that again, I suspect that would, of course, cost more.
So that's a hard thing to answer, but of how much does it cost to change? Because as a transportation expert repeatedly told me, there is a zero cost solution out there. It just is going to require some accommodations from everybody in the community. And that just requires a conversation. Like if a school system has to start at 11 o'clock, just to make it as an extreme, if the community is accepting of that as an extreme example, because they prioritize it being cost neutral from a budget standpoint, then that's an acceptable solution to the community. But it's really hard to put a price on student health, because we talk about the dollars for transportation, but we're not talking about the increased cost to families dealing with mental health issues and substance use, etc. Like you can't put a dollar on that. The economists have done an analysis of the benefits of improved graduation rates as far as a return on investment, but the cost to individual student health or the community's health as a whole can't be translated into X number of buses, and then each bus costs so much. So it's difficult to discuss numbers, right? And
Right.
when people throw out those numbers, it's also based on what are your assumptions, and really you have to question all of your assumptions. Are you assuming that middle and elementary cannot ride on the same bus? And if that is a thing that Montgomery County does not want elementary and middle school students to ride on the same bus, even if their campuses were co-located, then you're going to have two separate buses going into that same neighborhood. But if you are allowing them to be on the same bus because that's a community agreement, then maybe that can change the calculus of your transportation or not, right? And there's all these little questions that you have to ask. And one thing I would say is, based on talking to these transportation experts, is that they are really good at going in and asking these questions. And the people who do the everyday routing to get our students to school in a timely manner, safely, they're not used to really looking at this from an outside perspective and asking these questions of, why do you do this operation? Have you considered X, Y, and Z? Because they only know what they know. And then what they know is making sure students get to school day after day, but not necessarily looking at the whole picture. So that's where the transportation experts, such as the one that MCPS has, can really help them ask those operational questions. And so the initial estimates are always high, because just like any cost estimate of anything, once you start drilling down and you start saying yes to this, no to that, like, it changes the calculus. 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there can change whether you need more buses or not. And so
Right.
I think, based on what I've seen across the nation for the past decade, school systems will throw out this number. And a lot of people think about, like, oh, $10 million is a lot of money. And it is a lot of money. Like, don't get me wrong. But how big is MCPS's budget? It's got to be like 2 billion,
3.3 billion last year.
3.3 billion. Yeah, right. So from that, then all of a sudden 10 million is a rounding error. But in your personal checkbook, like $10 million is a heck of a lot of money. So it's sometimes hard for people to put that in perspective of what is the transportation cost? How much does MCPS currently use, right? Can they do some different things? Can they do the alternative transportation? Can they use ride-on? And then that changes their estimates for their costs. And so that's why you need the experts to come in and ask those questions, especially when you start adding the complexity of, can you talk to the county about their ride-on services and the MTA and all those things, which is not necessarily covered by the bus routing software. And I'll also point out the bus routing software is not as good as Waze. People think like you just like, or Google or whatever your routing du jour, it is not that level of technology. It should be, but it is not that user friendly. It's a little bit clunky about how you have to do it. So it's not so easy as just like put in some things and it will route. It's a little bit more involved in that.
Right.
So you need the technical advice to know how to do it.
Right. Yeah, obviously we can't put a dollar figure on any life. My question, I guess I was really getting at the point of, if we're already doing a study and we include those other components to get the full picture, to look at this option, I feel like that would reduce that overall cost in any way.
Right.
Amy.
And the study can be tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so it's worth it because you can probably save that much in improved operations, irrespective of out times.
Yeah. Thanks. Amy?
I mean, Lisa said most of this, and she's really knows much more about the technicalities around transportation. But, you know, throughout the country, and I've been in these conversations now for we'll say decades, districts have, you know, ultimately when they look back, will say, oh my gosh, you know, sometimes there's no cost, but if there is a transportation cost, it's often a one-time cost, and the benefits go on for years. And I do think it's just hard to see it that way when you're before you've made the change and you're in these conversations. The other thing I just wanted to come back to is something came up earlier about elementary school students. I do want to underscore that, yes, although it's true There isn't research looking specifically or a few studies at school start times in elementary school students. Keep in mind, I just want sort of the students and parents listening to this and understanding the science to understand the issue of the circadian phase delay occurs with the beginning of adolescence. And prior to that time, although some younger children may be more owl-like and have later biological clocks than other elementary school students, on average, elementary school age children, in other words, prior to the beginning of puberty, fall asleep earlier and wake up earlier in the morning. So I just want to make sure from a science perspective that the audience understands that.
Yeah.
Participants understand that.
Excellent. Thank you. And maybe share this video with your admins and with MCPS and write to them. Sandy, before I get to you, we have a couple of comments in the and questions in the Q&A. My child's high school bus comes at 6:40 and arrives at school by 7. Classes don't start till 7:45, exactly what Lisa was talking about. He's not happy about this. I wouldn't be either. There's no place to sleep when the doors are unlocked, aren't unlocked. And even so, even if you could, you can't get it back to that level of sleep that you need to be at for it to be restful. He would like to know, or they would like to know, who they talk to about this, administrators or MCPS. Who should a student talk to?
So I would say talk to your school, because if the issue is the school doors are not unlocking, but students have been dropped off, especially if the buses have dropped them off and departed, and there's nowhere in inclement weather, especially for students to congregate, then that becomes a safety issue for the school, because now you have an increasing number of students congregating and sleep deprived, making risky, poor decisions. And so I think that's a safety issue that the school needs to address for an operational standpoint. And they need to then discuss with the bus contractors and the transportation office about just how early those buses are arriving, because set 40 minutes before school starts, whatever time the doors open, that's ridiculous at any age. You don't need to do that early.
Right.
So can that bus pick up 10 minutes later? And I know that they are trying to be like, oh, but what about morning rush hour? Yes. But if they're already getting there 40 minutes earlier, then maybe 10 minutes could help. Right.
Yeah.
So
maybe a function of getting to their next route to get the next grade level in too. So
right. And so that's where there's these hidden things that they've dropped off the first students at 7 o'clock so that they can start their next route even earlier than they're even scheduled to. And that also gives the bus drivers time to go to the bathroom or, stop and get a cup of coffee, because you have to remember, your students getting picked up at 6, whatever. The drivers are then at the bus barns at 5 to do their safety checks and their vehicle checks, or earlier if they've got, some kind of crazy long route. And so the bus driver sleep deprivation should also be a concern for our communities as well, because they have to get up early as well to drive these big vehicles, and we're trusting them with our students. So I would say start with the school regarding the time that the doors open, and then start escalating it to transportation and the routing. And that's an excellent question.
Yeah. Yes. Another person asked, what is students' role in helping to implement start later time policy? And we had several Montgomery County students. I will include these links with the information when we put that out. Several Montgomery County students testify at the state level on the bill this year. And they were very, very well spoken. They made great points. And next year, we hope to have even more students, because this is about you. As they say, nothing about us without us. So come on board, help us get this done for you and everyone that follows you. And I just want to give Virginia a moment right after we hear from Sandy, and then we'll wrap up. I know it's getting a little bit late, but Sandy, go ahead. Then I'm going to ask Virginia to kind of touch on the impact that this could have with adults, because you see primarily adults, and this impacts their schedule as well.
Can I just say how the students also advocate to the student member of the board of education and bring it up through that, and then whatever student leadership, they could student leadership groups can also sign our joint petition, or any kind of advocate for anything, any kind of group, not discriminatory. There is a MCPS sleep reform is a student-led group, and one of the founders testified, but students can also advocate through their elected, however MCPS elects their student representative.
Yeah.
So there's a new person that's probably being chosen now, if hasn't already. And so bring that up to the student and have them advocate to point this out to the adults on the board. Thank you.
Yes, and the Montgomery County PTA's petition is in your program, as is the national PTA's resolution, or not petition, resolution, as is national PTA's and your resolution for Start School Later. So a lot of information in there as well. And I believe some contact information, but we'll put that in the what we send out to Sandra.
Yes. I was just going to mention two other things real quick back to what Lisa was saying about transportation and these routing systems not being like Waze. For example, one thing I learned when I got stuck myself in traffic going over railroad tracks here, and I called the depot to make sure the buses didn't come that way. And I was told that in Montgomery County, we don't let our school buses go over railroad tracks. So there's a lot of things with the routing software that your Waze will let you do in your car that these buses have, other legislative restrictions on how they could go. And the final thing I was just going to add is that it's really important, and this meeting was, I think, a great start. I want to thank everybody who came out tonight for it, because I think there's a certain fear in the community that MCPS will come in and impose a schedule that nobody likes, and that's where MCCPTA comes in and Start School Later comes in, because we're really trying to do this hand in glove as a community conversation and find a solution that gets us where we need to go. But it's not our intent at all to have something rammed down people's throats. And I think we're a very activist community. You could see by the number of people here tonight. And we all want to do better than we're doing now. And we've definitely got room to do that. Thank you. Laura, you're mute. You're mute.
I knew I'd do it sooner or later. Virginia, could you just give us a little bit about the impact for parents? Because I know this is roiling my head and probably others.
Sure. So can you hear me okay, first off? Okay, great. So I'm a clinical psychologist, and I work with sleep and a lot of adults, only adults over 18. So I do see some college students. And as I'm listening to this conversation, this is, public health issue. And I see a lot of people that come to me because they have sleep disorders. They have the night owl syndrome. They have insomnia. And their stories are how hard things were for them, especially in high school. And so when we talk about equity as well, I think about this subpopulation gets like a double hit because they already have my daughter, who's only 8, I see night owl tendencies in her. And I worry about when she goes to high school, it's going to be even harder for her. And so it can be really challenging, and they can just have that gap, right? If they're not going to be able to attend school. And a lot of these folks have trouble holding down jobs. It can be really challenging. So I would also say that in addition to all this great work that's being talked about here and trying to address things on that public health level, that of course, if you're noticing that for you or for your children or others around you, if there's something else going on, another sleep disorder, I think just starting with talking to your pediatrician, your regular doctor, so that you can get hooked up. Because for some people, it's not just about trying to change the time for this and that. It's not always a simple solution to just get more sleep. You might have to dig in a little bit more. And so just talk to people. There's professionals out there to help.
Actually, that's perfect. I want to say that one of our board members, Board of Education members is here, Laura Stewart, and she said to the students asking how to get involved, write to me. Same for the parents. Write to the school board, write to your school, and she has put a link in the Q&A that you should be able to see, but I will also include that. And Laura is very, very responsive. And I want to wrap up tonight with something that Maribel Ibrahim put in the chat or in the Q&A. She said, not a question, but a comment. School districts need to commit to health and safety and making this change. Buying things that a school district should be investing in is a waste of parent resources. Okay, so yes, we should be investing in making sure that every child is healthy and ready to learn, because we know that just as hunger is a barrier to learning, so is mental health, stress, lack of sleep, so many things. It's got to be a whole child approach. MCPS is really trying to take that on. But this has to be a part of it. It is a critical component. So yes, write to your board, write to the superintendent, write to anybody that you can think of. And if you want to get involved, reach out to Sandra. If you'll put your email in the chat again, Sandra, or in the Q&A, I'm sorry, so it goes to everyone. And anyone else that is taking requests, shall we say, you can put that in there. Or if you need additional information, reach out to Sandra or myself. I'll add mine as well. And we will do our best to get you all the information that you need and get you connected. We need your help. We want your help. We welcome you. All right. Well, thank you all for a very wonderful discussion tonight. And we still have most of the group that joined us on now. So that says a lot of the interest here. And I appreciate all of our speakers being on with us and all the participation. I will put the SSL link in the chat one more time, and that will be open until tomorrow night at 9 o'clock or thereabouts, when I remember to turn off the responses. And there were a couple of people, if you're still on and you had issues with the SSL forms or anything, just hang around and I'll help you figure that out. Thank you all very much appreciate it. I'm so glad we could get together.
Thank you so much for hosting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Hi,
Thank
Laura.
you.
Hi, how are you?
Good. My daughter was the one who I had put her on my phone, and so she was, it was hard for her to get back and forth between your chat. And I know she clicked on the links, but I think they may have closed, like the second and the third and the fourth one, so I could see them in my browser. But she was confused. She thought that when she clicked on them, then she'd already completed them. I apologize for that.
Yeah, because they were similar, but the questions were different in each one. That's why I numbered them, but I understand the confusion.
Yeah.
So she's logged in under your name.
I think so it is. It's Corinne Hertz is her name. It's what I think I'm showing up as.
Okay.
Which is her name.
Then I will see it in the report for when they logged in.
Yeah. I think she originally came in under her mom's name. It's on my phone, but I think when she first came on, it was under Colleen Fahey, which is her mom's name. And then I had her change it to Corinne Hertz. So it should hopefully show up in here.
Okay. All right, great. Not a problem. We'll take care of it.
Okay.
Right.
Thanks so much. I apologize for that.
That's okay. Thank you.
My daughter, Caroline Wilkins, also had a problem, but just with questionnaire number
Marilyn.
4. Hi, how are you, Chris? She
Good.
had a problem just with questionnaire number 4. We ran into a computer glitch. So she answered all the other questionnaires in the final questionnaire, but we wanted to make sure she still got credit.
Yes,
So,
that's fine.
okay, great. Thank
As
you
I
so
said,
much.
I can see when they log in and out, and that was just to keep people engaged.
Yep.
And to kind of see if they were connecting with the information.
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Have a great night.
Thank you. You too. All right. Ticking down. I think Laura left.
Okay. Well, I'm glad that she wrote in for people to write to the board directly. I think that was great that students, want that invitation. And student member of the board is a great potential asset. It could be a campaign issue, right? For the
I
next,
was thinking the same thing.
yeah, I know, we're not supposed to be political, so, so I can't even be political for a.
No, we're not supposed to be partisan.
Oh, partisan. Well, to me, any student who wants to take this on is a great student, and all the
Yeah.
students tonight were great, being here and learning about this.
Yep. All right. Well, I'm gonna end this meeting. I think there's some people that are
Yeah, I was
maybe
just
stuck
curious if
there.
anybody had a question who stayed on, although these might be
don't-
stepped away for
yeah.
a second and.
Yeah. I don't think no one's raised their hand or piped in. Those were the two that I had comments from before.
Okay. Okay, great.
Yeah. So I'm just, hold on one second.
I'm gonna wait till the bitter end just in case you need me for
Hmm.
any.
All right. I kicked them all out.
Oh, okay. All right, so it's just us. Okay, good. All right, well, I think it went well. What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, we had great attendance and everyone stayed. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it was really, really good.
Right. I mean, sometimes my attitude is, why would I bother all these professionals when I see the research and I can consolidate it? And that has been helpful, but it's nothing like hearing it from a practitioner. I mean,
Right.
they did fabulous, and it also illustrated just how much is out there because each of them was very clear that they just gave a slice of their expertise, and
Right.
it's still enough for all these speakers. And Lisa's been through the ringer. She spent a decade on this with all the transportation piece. And believe me, when I started doing this too, I never dreamed I would be involved in transportation. I had this vision that Montgomery County was so together and so well organized. All I had to do is remind them that when we come out of COVID, to go back and finish what they started in 2015. I had no idea how this was all going to evolve. And where the gaps are, but now we
Yeah.
know, and we've got great leadership now that can really, step into this. I think we've got a willingness and a need, and with all these people wanting to step up, I think that's great that these people are like, who do we write to? What do we do?
Right. Yeah. I mean, even if you get 5 out of this group that, jump in and join in.
Right. I would cede, I get 5 minutes at every hearing. I would happily cede my time to a student to let them speak if they want to and use some of my time.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, I'm gonna get out of this chair and
Okay,
get off
yes.
this computer.
Yes, everything looked great, the materials, everything, and it worked just as well with them doing their own slides. Like that was fun.
Yeah. Yeah. When you're virtual, it's easier because they have them and they can just use them. When it's in person, the shuffle and all the time is longer. So
Right, perfect.
um,
But
and
when the hosting wasn't shared, they did fine just doing a screen share.
yeah, I don't know what was up with the hosting, and I don't know what's up with the chat. It's not letting me save the chat. Can you see if you can save it? Well, you don't have everything. I
Right,
have it set to automatically save, but I hope it does.
right. Rodney asked me, he texted me to see to ask me to save the chat, and I said Laura would do it and send it out. But
Yeah,
but
I have it set, like I said, to automatically save. So hopefully it does that, because if not, I'm gonna be ticked. But and the Q&A saves automatically. So
okay.
Ugh,
Okay, do you
we'll
want
get
me?
it.
I wonder if there's a way to print this. There's a way to export. Let's see. Maybe
Export what you're doing, the Q&A
chat.
or
I'm trying to do the chat, but
on the chat?
not quite.
Well, I know I can. I mean, usually I can save it. Like I said, all my settings got reset. I did check off the save automatically, and I'll check that again before
You
I
know what?
stop.
Don't hang up just 1 second. I'm